Donald. It's very good to be in touch with you again. It's been too long. This pandemic has meant that none of us have been in regular touch with each other at all, apart from on these Zooms.
Yes. Good morning, Camilla. Very nice to be in touch again. At least we can be in contact, albeit remotely.
I know. And this week we are looking at the history and of Culloden, of the 275th anniversary that is occurring there. And we have spoken about that, and also of the wonderful regeneration of the castle at Inverness and the surrounding area. And we thought it would be wonderful if we could catch up with you to speak not of so much of how all the chiefs come together to do things, but because that is not so much, as you've explained, how the Standing Council works, but to talk about what the Standing Council is and how it brings together the chiefs, but also then what it is to be a clan chief at this time, and your role within your family's clan.
Yes, of course. Well, just on Culloden, which of course is such a resonant name for us, especially for those who supported the rightful cause. Yes, Camilla, well, thank you very much for inviting me to join the podcast, and delighted to talk about all those things. Let me start very simply. The Standing Council is a grouping of chiefs, nothing particularly more nor less than that. It's a body where the chiefs can join if they wish to, or stay outside, where we have a total membership of about 120. Maybe there are about 135 chiefs and heads of family in total. The number fluctuates, but roughly 120 members of the Standing Council. We act as a forum, an informal grouping, where the chiefs can exchange ideas, exchange experiences. We keep in touch with each other on our various activities as individual chiefs. And particularly useful is exchanging experience of our visits abroad. I think personally, my view is that it's hugely important for each chief to be as visible to their kinsmen as possible. And we're very aware of the great support that we get from our kinsmen overseas. Some chiefs are more active than others, but it's always a pleasure of, if you call it a job, a pleasure of the job to actually travel overseas and to meet new people and to reestablish links with old friends. Certainly in my experience, wherever I've gone abroad, we've always had a very warm welcome. And that's one of the great pleasures, and I think one of the most important roles of a chief today.
Well, and the last time I, in fact, saw you was in New York, when you joined for the Tartan Day Parade in New York about 3 years ago. And that really was brought together, I think, over 45 different clans that were marching together and celebrating within the parade, which was wonderful, and an example of how much it means to have you over here in your role as the convener, but also as your role as the head of the MacLarens, because your contingent was large that year.
It was, and I seem to remember we had 2 or 3 chiefs on parade that day. There was certainly Merlin Hay, the Earl of Errol, and the late Rue Morrison. Very sad to have lost him, but he was always a very active chief.
And we had Sarah Fraser, who was representing the Frasers for her cousin.
Indeed, yes, it was a good turnout, and I felt as we were going down, it was very interesting, because a lot of the people who were lining the streets were very sort of pro-Scottish, and they knew what this was all about, and they were into their tartan and everything. But quite a few New Yorkers sort of heard this razzmatazz, and they weren't entirely sure what it was about. And so we were sort of gaily waving to the spectators on the roadside, and some of them looked at us as if we were circus animals. I think
No.
I think most of them knew exactly what we were up to, and it was a very good, fun event.
Well, I think that we have not had the parade in person on the avenue, on 6th Avenue, for the last 2 years due to COVID, and we've been virtual. We have a very active committee and a president who's very good at all this stuff. And we did the very first virtual parade, I believe, which was wonderful. But we're so looking forward to inviting people from near and far to come back to New York next year and celebrate with us. And maybe we'll even entice you back to the Big Apple again.
Thank you, Camilla. I'd love to come back. Yes, perhaps. When is your next significant anniversary? I think it's is it in about 2 or 3 years' time?
Yes, I think we're in 23. We're at 25. The 25th anniversary of Tartan Day. Yeah. And so that would be a time to see if you might come across, because I know that Tartan Day is now celebrated, as you know, throughout the United States. Yeah. And this year, because of the virtual, we brought together celebrations from afar afield as Los Angeles and Florida, and down they have this thing called Tartan. They have a festival called Tartan South, which is a 5-day festival, along, of course, with Washington and ourselves up in New York. So a lot going on. We can keep you busy for a good week.
The Gaelic translation of Tartan South would be Tartan Sashain, as in Sassenach, but the two words don't really go together. You can't have a Tartan Sassenach. But Tartan South will do very well. No, I think that'll be great fun. The other thing about Tartan Day, which I think is very important, is the events that go around it. The parade is important, obviously, the public expression, and the fact that it is a public event where so many people can participate. Fantastic. But the extra events that are arranged, particularly the lectures, the academic side of things, the historical research. And Tartan Day tends to attract some very distinguished speakers, both in New York and in Washington. And I think that's a very important contribution in furthering our knowledge of our own country, and also Scots abroad, learning more about their origins.
Well, I think it's wonderful that we managed to have a focus every year at the beginning of April, around Tartan Day, which is April 6th, that there's this focus, and we look to put programming together. This year, the American Scottish Foundation was involved in the 250th anniversary of Abbotsford and Sir Walter Scott. And down in Washington, they had McLeish speaking, the former First Minister, speaking on various subjects. But this is all, you mentioned how collaboration and sharing of ideas is so important to the Standing Council. And we find that here, when we do such things as the Scottish North American Leadership Conference, the community conference, which we're very grateful for the Standing Council. You gave remarks to us last year, and various chiefs took part in the program, bringing the message from Scotland. And I think that's really what we appreciate so much. So in your role as chief, can you tell us a little bit more about how of your community? I know you're not a great fan of the word diaspora, so I will.
I'm a great fan of the phrase Scots overseas, or those of Scottish descent.
Okay.
So let's not say what I'm not a fan of. Let's say what I am in favour of.
Okay, good. So if you could, for instance, this Australia is so strong as a community, Canada, the United States. Where have you got very large contingents of the clan that are actively doing things at this time?
Well, as you say, we do have a strong society in Australia, and that includes members from New Zealand. There are also MacLarens in parts of Africa, particularly South Africa. I've not made a clan MacLaren journey there yet. I've only visited privately. North America obviously is hugely important. Just talking of my own clan, many MacLarens settled both in Canada and in the States. Interestingly, it reflected the social conditions of the time when the clans started to emigrate from their native glens. Each clan told a slightly different story. In our case, we had a number of MacLarens that emigrated to Canada in the early 19th century. But the biggest migration from Balquhidder, which is my glen, occurred, well, it actually started occurring as early as the Middle Ages, because the land is so poor and it wasn't just strong enough to support a growing population. So we have MacLarens leaving naturally to other parts of Scotland, but also to Sweden in the 1500s, where they enrolled in the support of the king. and there are still MacLaren families there. They don't call themselves MacLaren, but they use the stem name Lauren or Laurentius.
Oh,
And I'm still in contact with them. One doesn't associate sort of Highland stuff with Sweden or Northern Europe necessarily, but there are MacLarens there. In North America, the biggest migration probably to the southern states was from the mid 18th century onwards. We didn't suffer from the clearances in this part of Perthshire. It's too easy to say, oh, well, there was Culloden, the Jacobite risings collapsed, and then there were the ghastly clearances and everyone left. I mean, that's too simplistic a view of history. Obviously, the ending of the Jacobite rising in 1746 had a profound effect right across Scotland, and it did have a contribution to people leaving their homes. But certainly in our case, the economic pressures had been in place for generations before that. The Jacobite risings of the 18th century and the denouement contributed to a process that was already underway. And so, to come back to your question, we have many MacLarens who left from the sort of late 1740s, 1750s onwards, and who came to the Carolinas in the first place, and then branched out south and west in particular, as well as north, but particularly south and westwards.
have you been to many of the Highland Games over here? They are such such an important part of the Scottish American community over here. They really are such large gatherings. I think people from Scotland are so surprised and amazed by 100,000 people being at Pleasanton over a weekend in California,
Yes.
or 50,000 up in.
Absolutely, yes. I've been to many Highland Games. I did my first clan tour of America, both Canada and the US, when I was in between school and university. I got on a Greyhound bus and started off in Toronto, spent a couple of weeks in Canada, then a month traveling around the States, and then another 2 weeks back in Canada. So I was then, I think I was 17, and it was terrific because I was staying every 2 or 3 days with members of my own clan in different parts of the country, and that included 1 or 2 Highland Games. And since then, yes, I've been to Pleasanton, Stone Mountain, Grandfather Mountain, of course, and several other smaller games. There's one nice thing about Grandfather Mountain in North Carolina. The president of the games is a chap called Steve Quillen. Now, that doesn't sound like a MacLaren name, but he is, in fact, a MacLaren, descended from a Lawson, and Lawson is one of the MacLaren names, and his ancestor actually fought at Culloden. So Steve Quillen, now president of the Grandfather Mountain Games, has a direct and very personal connection with that part of Scottish history.
Grandfather Mountain is unique in as much as it really is probably one of the most traditional Highland Games I've been to.
Yes, yes.
I've really felt that with the clans all around the
Yes.
centre field,
Yes.
and not off to the side in a village.
Yes, it's a perfect setting. But each games in America, I found, is slightly different from the other. Some are, and I think Grandfather Mountain is included in, certainly is a leader in this, really try to, as we would say, get it right. It's so easy with the romance associated with Scotland and the Tartans and so on. It's so easy to go a bit over the top, and you can get invented clan histories, certainly invented clan tartans, but that's nothing new. That's not an American phenomenon. The merchants of Edinburgh were inventing clan tartans from the 19th century onwards. But sometimes there is not enough attention paid to what I would call authenticity. We've got plenty of really stirring, interesting Scottish history, factual history, but also traditions. And I think it is important that those traditions are respected. It's only
the heritage villages that have become more popular in the last few years within the games, I think, are very important.
Yes, yes. One aspect of this is you may think it's a slightly trivial matter, but you will know, of course, that a chief is entitled to wear 3 golden eagle feathers. It's a form of distinction, and a chieftain 2 feathers. And you can sometimes go to games, and not just in North America, but also in our own country, and people will stick any sort of rubbish in their bonnet and swash around thinking that they're sort of passing themselves off as some sort of chief or chieftain, head of a minor branch. And that I have to find is a bit annoying. You mentioned Pleasanton. I think the tradition that they have established for themselves is that all their past presidents are allowed to call themselves chiefs, and so they go around with 3 feathers. Now, I personally think that if you think that the whole business of chiefship has certain genuineness about it and is a tradition worth respecting, then people wearing 3 feathers when they're not entitled to is not right.
Right.
This is not a colonial pitch. I can't take a gunboat up whatever the Pleasanton River is and start shooting them up for wearing 3 feathers. But it's just a point. And some Scots overseas are not only passionate about their heritage and their origins, but they're passionate about respecting it. And I think that that is absolutely right.
I agree very much on that. I think that's where, I think the festival element that's begun to come into the games has to be handled in a measured way within what is more of the historical pageantry.
Of course, these are great celebrations, and there are parties going on, and as it's a very human activity. People come together, they're having fun, and that's terrific. And it's very heartwarming for us in Scotland that what we take for granted, what is on our doorstep, what we've imbibed from our earliest years, that is so strongly celebrated all around the world. North America, but as you said at the beginning, all over the world. I was in Australia just 2 years ago, and I attended the Royal Edinburgh Military Tattoo in Sydney, but alongside that, also went to the Canberra Highland Games and visited other parts of Australia. The link with Scotland, it's far away, of course, but the link with Scotland is just as strong. And I was hugely impressed by the warmth of the hospitality I received there, as indeed from America whenever I visit.
Well, as a transplant to the United States, I can tell you that when you are away from your home, you become more passionate and connected with it than you ever were when you were there. You sort of took it for granted. And that's why the power of the societies, and I apologize for my corgi, the power of the societies is so strong because it gives people the ability to come together. If you think about it, the St. Andrew's Society in New York began down at Francis Tavern as a way for people to hear news from the old country. The ships would arrive and bring them news.
Very interesting. That's very interesting. Yes. The point you raise about the societies is a hugely important one, Camilla, because you can have the chiefs and you have the clans and all and the identity, which is very strong and so on. But when the clan is no longer living as a cohesive, as it was, socio-economic military unit on its own territory, in our case, in quite a small area in our own glen, when you no longer have that, the role of the society, and many of them were formed in the 20th century, but particularly in the 21st century now, is absolutely important. A chief will find it so much more difficult to exercise his natural responsibilities by keeping in touch with his or her kin, whether at home or abroad, if there isn't an active and responsible society working with the chief. And as you say, both the clan societies and the other Scottish societies perform a vital function.
We, I mean, in the last year, when we haven't been able to gather and come together, the bringing the Highland Games online, we were able to join for Braemar and for Stirling, as well as for Highland Games that were happening here. We joined Fergus, put on a wonderful one from Canada. We joined with the New Hampshire Highland Games, etc. I think that was so important for making people feel connected and to have a sense of community.
I was very sorry not to be able to go to Fergus. I was due to go there last year, and we were going to have the Clan MacLaren Society of North America AGM at Fergus, but sadly that had to be postponed. But I hope I'll get there one day. Of course, you were asking about games that I've been to. The most recent one was down in Texas, and there are many MacLarens down there. It was at Salado, and I greatly enjoyed that. But there's one interesting thing. If we get into DNA, we'll be here all afternoon, and I don't suppose you do. But
the next podcast.
but there's one very interesting anecdote. I had my DNA taken a few years ago by our clan genealogist, and there's a great project underway seeing if the DNA matches can supplement, not supplant, but supplement the genealogical information that we already have, the family records, the family trees, and so on. And our genealogist took my DNA sample, and he came back to me a few years later and said, you know, that there is a pocket of MacLarens in Tennessee who have almost exactly the same DNA as you. It's amazing. In Tennessee, just a small pocket of MacLarens there. So I was quite pleased, because when he took my DNA, I said, well, look, what happens if there aren't any other MacLaren matches? I suppose I'll have to stand down as chief. And he said, well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
We better not go near all of that's another discussion. I'd love to talk to you at another time about the role of the Lion Court and what they have been doing in connection to the clans and helping with the clan chief, finding the clan chiefs for clans that have not had anyone for many years. But I think we should save that for another time.
So, just on that, Camilla, it's a good example, because I think that there is sometimes quite a lot of sort of mush and confusion and haze about the whole clan business and the whole business of tartan and so on. I mean, it's great fun, but when for people involved in the whole business of clanship, whether it's the chiefs or the societies, or in the case that you mentioned, the Lion Court, the Lord Lion doesn't seek to involve himself directly in clan activities, but it's a crucial adjunct. He's a pillar of accuracy and authenticity for people who need heraldic matters to be settled with the force of the law. Otherwise, it's a free-for-all. So the Standing Council of Scottish Chiefs has a very close working relationship with the Lord Lion. But just as the Standing Council doesn't try to trample on what the chiefs are doing, that is up to them. Lion doesn't try to trample on what the chiefs and the clans are doing. These are distinct areas of activity, and it helps to give clarity and focus to what everyone involved is trying to do.
I'm so grateful for you to join us today. And also, I want to restate how much I know so many of my colleagues and myself appreciate your leadership and your help. It really is wonderful to see how the Standing Council is so involved in helping us in small ways and large ways. We really are very grateful and look forward to seeing some of you over here very soon, or us being able to join you.
Well, thank you. And just to finish that, as we began, actually, the idea of travel is so important. And one thing that the Standing Council does in bringing the chiefs together, just occasionally, we don't meet on that often a basis, but when chiefs get together, they can exchange experiences, they can swap stories. We know what's coming up, what the next big event might be.
So important.
And it serves as a forum where we can actually encourage each other to get out there. And there are some chiefs who are more active and more extrovert, perhaps, than others. Others are perhaps naturally a bit shyer, but this encourages people to get out and reinforce these very important human links. And it's all based around kinship and something that we can all be hugely proud of.
Thank you so much. We are here to help and to welcome any of you that are coming across. We always appreciate your visits and your support as the MacLarens and also as the Standing Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Camilla, and thank you for the support of the American Scottish Foundation and for keeping in touch like this. Very important, very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Kirstin. I'm so glad you are able to join us from the National Trust for Scotland Foundation and talk to us today about Culloden. This is a 275th anniversary of this very important moment in Scottish history. And thank you for taking the time to take us to Culloden and to explain the work of the National Trust for Scotland and the foundation here in the United States.
Thank you so much, Camilla. I'm thrilled to be here. My name is Kirstin Bridier, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Trust for Scotland Foundation USA. And I'm really excited to share with you the latest news and research from one of the National Trust for Scotland's most beloved properties, Culloden Battlefield. As many of you know, last month the Trust commemorated the 275th anniversary of the Battle of Culloden. Due to COVID, the occasion was not marked in person, as has been tradition since the 1920s, and as can be seen here in this photo from 2019, but instead with a virtual symposium. And we heard from scholars, including Drs. Christopher Duffy and Murray Piddock, who joined with Trust archaeologists, historians, and educators to talk about why Culloden resonates with visitors from around the world nearly 3 centuries later, as well as how we continue to learn about and protect the historic landscape, and what we can do, even from America, to help conserve this truly important place. The last major battle on British soil, Culloden, ended the Jacobite Rising and Pawnee Prince Charlie's claim to the British throne against the Hanoverians. And a wild moor outside Inverness became the final resting place of 1,500 Jacobite and 50 government soldiers who fought and died there. As Darren Lane from the University of St. Andrews notes, Culloden was a tactically simple battle that left a long and complex legacy. Many believe that Culloden changed Highland culture forever, marking the death of the clan system and paving the way for Highland clearances and immigration to the American colonies. And of course, the Scottish diaspora went on to shape the United States in profound ways, pioneering industry and philanthropy, federalizing our national parks, and excelling in arts, sciences, and engineering. For some, Culloden represents the sacrifices made by the Jacobite cause. Others see the battle as proof of the power and longevity of the British Empire. And of course, Culloden is closely tied to wider political movements, from 18th century revolutions in France and America to today's discussions about Scottish independence. Parts of Culloden Battlefield have been in the National Trust for Scotland's care since 1937. It's the most visited battlefield in Great Britain. In 2019, which is the Trust's last pre-COVID year of operation, we welcomed 300,000 visitors, 80% of whom lived outside of the United Kingdom, a testament to the resonance and universality of the site's story. The battlefield was not always so revered. In fact, a roadway went straight through the clan burial site until the 1980s, and that's what this picture is showing. There used to be a major road to Inverness right in front of this cairn. But over the past 84 years, the Trust has acquired multiple parcels of land so that it now cares for the core of the historic battlefield. And a new visitor center opened in 2007 was designed to blend into the wider landscape. Earlier tea houses and visitor centers look jarring to our eyes and have been removed from the property. Even 275 years later, there's so much more to learn and to share with visitors. Military historian Christopher Duffy is studying the impact of geography on the battle itself, how the boggy moor might have contributed to the Jacobites' defeat. And his work overlaps with recent LIDAR survey, that stands for Light Detection and Ranging Survey, which involves lasers being sent down from an airplane and bouncing back up to create a 3-dimensional map of the site's microtopography. The Trust's head of archaeology, Derek Alexander, is combining this new understanding of the physical landscape with historical records of the battle to give us the best ever understanding of what happened on April 16th, 1746, including an idea of what could be seen by combatants on different parts of the moor. And this is a picture of one of the LiDAR scans, and you can see the mounds in the middle of the photo are the actual burial sites, the clan grave sites. And you can see heading across the photograph from southwest to northeast, that road that went straight through the burial sites, which has since been covered over. Earlier this year, the Trust also launched a virtual 360-degree tour of Culloden, narrated by Graham McTavish. The Battle of Culloden, the Jacobites' last stand, gives visitors a chance to experience the battle from the comfort of their own homes, which is more important than ever this year. If nature were allowed to take its course, the landscape at Culloden would look very different. The Trust works hard to maintain the appearance of the site as it would have looked 275 years ago, when it was a moor and agricultural land. The Trust gets help in controlling the relentless growth of self-seeded trees on the site with the use of grazing animals, Shetland cows, seen here, Highland coos and goats. This allows us to keep machinery and chemicals to a minimum. American donors have supported the purchase and maintenance of livestock over the past 3 years. Just one small way that we in North America are making a real concrete difference to the interpretation of Culloden every day. And of course, this land management plan is the opposite of the Trust strategy at other properties, including Mar Lodge, where instead of keeping the land clear, we're concentrating on rewilding that property and regrowing the Caledonian pine forest. But the Trust's most pressing work at Culloden is fighting back against the unrelenting piecemeal development that is encroaching on the relatively small piece of the historic battlefield that the Trust owns. We're in real danger of losing the sense of place, that emotional feeling that gives you the space to grieve and process the stories from that day that visitors have when they're standing on the battlefield. View Hill, a neighborhood of 16 modern houses, was approved for development in 2018 after a 7-year battle with the local planning board. It stands on a piece of the wider battlefield landscape where the British cavalry moved against the Jacobites. It's a significant intrusion on this historic place. And in the last year alone, 6 development applications have been proposed on all sides of the battlefield, each coming with a series of revisions and appeals that take an enormous amount of time and money to fight. Insensitive and inappropriate development is threatening Culloden's remarkable sense of place. And if you've visited Culloden, you know what I mean. It's a battlefield, but it's also a burial ground, and the sense of history around you is palpable. Sense of place is an intangible quality, to be sure. At Culloden, it combines elements of the cultural significance of the site, the historic events that actually happened here, and the beauty of the landscape itself. Together, these three have a greater impact than they do individually. Last year, the Trust began a planning process focused not on what we don't want to see at Culloden, but rather on what we do want to see. A key part of this work, which resulted in a report called Culloden 300 and will guide our planning for the next quarter century, was to ask the public if this landscape really did matter to them. Happily, the answer was a resounding yes, with more than 75% of respondents giving the Trust a mandate to work collaboratively to advocate for the future of the battlefield. And I just want to quote a couple of respondents who said it better than I ever could. One said, "The atmosphere can only be maintained if the landscape is preserved. Only with wide open spaces can you feel how it must have been for both sides on that day. Any development in the area would intrude on history." And another said, "Culloden must be by far the most emotionally significant place anywhere in Scotland." So what are our next steps? Well, the National Trust for Scotland is going to collaborate with partners, the local community, visitors, scholars, Historic Environment Scotland, the government, and others proactively working together on a future-focused management plan to conserve the cultural landscape of Culloden battlefield. The Trust is also going to pursue acquiring land and developing conservation agreements with private landowners and other organizations. The Trust is going to work on a rubric to measure this intangible sense of place. We know how Culloden contributes to the local economy. We employ 70 people and bring in £7 million from tourists annually. 75% of the food sold in the cafe is grown within a 40-mile radius of the battlefield, and the gift shop also features wares from local small businesses. But we also need to be able to measure the impact that living in the presence of history has on the Inverness community. And finally, the Trust put forward a manifesto in advance of last week's election, calling for Scotland to adopt legally binding targets to reverse the decline in nature, as has been done in the EU and in England. And we're seeking designation for Culloden as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So how can you help? Well, a tax-deductible contribution via the National Trust for Scotland Foundation USA will help the Trust to protect all of the battlefield and not just the core area around the visitor center. It will also support environmentally conscious land management and education programs for Scottish students. Culloden is a piece of history, but it's also a living landscape, a rare and powerful site that can help us process the conflicts of our past and our present. I'm looking forward to returning soon, and I hope that you'll have a chance to as well. And here are some websites for more information. You can watch Culloden's 275th anniversary program, which was a day-long symposium, a lot of really interesting films and talks. You can read the full Culloden 300 report, and you can make a contribution to support the Trust's conservation agenda for Culloden in the US at our website. So well, that's it from me.
Well, no, it's not, because I have a few questions for you.
Sure.
This is wonderful because you really have given us such a complete picture of the battlefield and the importance of of being able to have this wide expanse and understand what it was to be within that place. But with many of these wonderful historic sites, whether it's Stonehenge or Culloden, it is difficult to balance having so many crowds with the preservation of the site as well. The visitors center allows you to accomplish a lot of that, but how do you manage people's access onto the battlefield?
It's a really great question. And I can say for myself, when I visited a couple of years ago, I was not surprised, but a little astonished to see the impact of visitor footfall around the Clan Fraser markers specifically. So, you know, the Outlander effect has had terrific effect on the tourist economy in Scotland. It was very visible that day with flowers and sort of muddy footprints lay all around that marker and not around the other markers. What I would say is that Culloden battlefield is actually open to the public. Anyone's allowed to walk on it. The visitor center is where you need to come inside and pay a fee in order to learn about the battle and see the artifacts and the stories of the day. As I said, in 2019, we had 300,000 people visit the battlefield. Some of these are people who come every day to walk their dogs there. And then of that, 220,000 people came to the visitor center, which I think is huge. It's such a tremendous amount of people who really want to learn the history. I think when you learn the history of the site, you're more appreciative of it and you're more careful of the space. I do know that the Trust is doing timed ticketing now, in part because of COVID, but I'll be interested to see if some of that continues even post-COVID in terms of managing the property. But fortunately, it's such a large and wide open space that even if you're there with hundreds of other people, you really can still feel like you're having your own personal experience.
And one of the things that sometimes we here in the States forget is how very easy it is to get to places within Scotland. It is a wonderful train ride from Glasgow or Edinburgh up to Inverness. I love that train ride. It's like 3.5 hours, 4 hours. And Inverness is just 5 miles from the battlefield. So a great place for people to stay. And now they're looking at the castle, and there's a regeneration program going on there. We're going to talk to Professor Heddle in a moment about that. So really can be a wonderful place to stay in Inverness, visit Culloden, go to make sure that they're at the visitor center, and then travel out from there, because you have some wonderful properties around here, haven't you, as well?
We do. And in fact, when I went up, we stayed in Inverness, but we also made a trip to Fort William, which was like a charming little town. And one of the properties that's near Culloden that we visited is Brodie Castle, which this time of year is just filled with daffodils and just amazingly beautiful. There are so many trust properties, and this is a really special one. I could have spent the whole day there.
Can you, one final question. For many of us, we're not going to probably be able to return to Scotland immediately, but we don't want to not be involved in what is happening, and to take a moment. Are there some, are there any special commemorations that are upcoming over this next year as you commemorate the 275th? And also, are people able to watch the ceremony that McTavish was doing the documentary around?
Yes. So if you go to the first link here, you can see all of the 275th anniversary programs. And that includes the ceremony the morning of, which a huge amount of it was in Gaelic, and then it's closed captioned underneath so you can understand it. We will keep, so we're in close touch with our colleagues at Culloden, and we'll keep Americans up to date on any important developments regarding development around the battlefield or other commemorations that might happen throughout the year.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing this moment with us. So I look forward to catching up with you soon. And thank you for sharing this with us. It was really a wonderful insight.
Thank you.
Good morning, Donna. And I think I'm speaking to you. You're up in Orkney this morning.
Well, it's this afternoon here, Camilla, and yes, I am indeed in Orkney, where I suspect it's not quite such, excuse me, I just completely lost it there. I suspect it's not such a nice day as it is with you.
Well, actually, we are beginning to seem like it might be summer. And with everything going on, it really, I think, is lifting our spirits. We're speaking this week about Culloden and the area around it. And one cannot but take this opportunity to talk to you about what is happening at Inverness Castle, but also around the regeneration of not just the castle, but the whole area. For those of us that are not as familiar as we might be with the history to Inverness Castle, could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, certainly. I mean, the Inverness Castle that we see today is very much a Victorian construct, but there's been a castle on that particular site for a considerable period of time. There have been castles there, various different kinds of castles since 1057. Been a castle there. The castle was said to be built by Malcolm III of Scotland. That's Malcolm Canmore, big head.
Right.
You'll know him, I'm sure. And the first Inverness Castle was partially destroyed by Robert the Bruce. James I summoned 50 clan chiefs to a parley at Inverness Castle in 1426. And Mary, Queen of Scots, also visited Inverness Castle. It's certainly been a feature of the landscape of Inverness for a very long time. Maybe not quite as it was originally built, of course, but as I said, what we see today is very much the Victorian version of Inverness Castle, but it's always been a marker on the landscape for since the 11th century. And of course, for a long time, it has served as the Sheriff Courts, which is why people couldn't visit it very readily. They could visit the North Tower. From about April 2017, there was limited access to the North Tower, but now with the whole new development that we're going to have with this access everywhere and all sorts of exciting things happening there.
Inverness is this beautiful market town. When I was there, I couldn't get over how easy it was to just walk around it. And everywhere you look, you see this wonderful castle on top of the hill. It really is a magnificent sight. And you are part of a group that is making sure that there's an academic, but also very connected, interactive element to what will go into the castle that we as visitors will see. I have to say that you note that you are normally, you're Professor Donna Heddle, and you're the director of the Institute of Northern Studies, but also chair of UHI, University of Highlands and Islands Tourism. So this is a wonderful role that takes you away from your normal situation, but gives you a lot of scope into other things. With this project, you're going to see the castle in a different way when you visit it. What is the main sort of focus? How are you making it different for the visitor to experience the castle?
Well, it's very exciting. I mean, Inverness Castle is a really iconic image. In fact, it features on the reverse side of the £50 note issued by the Royal Bank of Scotland, for example. So if you're checking your cash when you're over here, you'll see it there. So that very Victorian image of the sandstone castle there is something we're not going to be changing necessarily the view of that so much, but it's what we're doing with the castle area and the surrounding area itself that's so exciting. And that's why a group of academics across UHI, from our Centre for History, from our creative departments, from filmmaking, from screenwriting, from photography, from my own area of Northern Studies, language, literature, and so on, are coming together to provide academic content. Because what's going to happen to Inverness Castle, which is going to make it the most marvellous experience for people to come to. And as you know, Camilla, it's really easy to get to Inverness. Really easy to get to Inverness from Edinburgh. Nip on a train, there's a flight, there's a bus even, which is tremendous fun. And you're deposited right in the centre of Inverness, where you can see the castle right in front of you when you get there. So what could be easier? And what they're going to do with the castle is they're going to turn it into a museum, an art gallery. There's going to be a boutique hotel attached to it. There's going to be a row of shops underneath and round the streets around it as well, really utilising this marvellous space. But it's not going to be a museum in the sense that we might, I mean, I'm of mature years, so when I was taken to a museum as a little girl in the National Museum of Scotland, it was a very Victorian affair where you went and you looked at things. Now, in this new museum, you won't just be looking at things, you'll be experiencing them as well. It's going to be a multimedia, intensive experience, so you'll know you've been somewhere different and you'll learn different things.
And you've got an opportunity, you were saying previously, for all of us that have a connection to the Highlands to maybe share our story through this project, which is the spirit of the Highlands people and the stories that one has. Can you let us know how we can be a part of it in this way?
Well, I love this. I love oral history anyway. I think the lived experience of communities, past, present and future, is one of the most special things that we have in Scotland to offer. So I'm very excited about the Spirit of the Highlands project. And after all, we are all custodians of the Spirit of the Highlands, all of us who are connected to this place. Now, what we've decided to do is that as part of the exhibits in the museum, we will have stories being told by people. Sound, it could be sound, it could be video, it could be all sorts of different formats for that. So what we're doing at the moment is we're asking people to send us their stories. And they can do that in various forms. And I think you're going to have some details at the end there, yes, where people can find out a bit more about that. But the idea is that we want to reach out and find all the missing stories, because there's so many. In many ways, it's what we call intangible cultural heritage. And the cultural heritage, the tangible cultural heritage of this project is the castle. Right, the building in front of us, but who were the people? What are the stories? What are the stories about the Highlands that we want to remember? It could be anything from an old recipe for bannock to the story of somebody's wedding dress. It could be the story of the Polish soldiers in Easter Ross, stories from the Sikh troops who were there during the war, for example, and didn't take too well to the food. But it could be stories about your family. It could be stories about objects. It could be folklore. It could be a song. It could be any of these things that express for you the spirit of the Highlands.
And then there's also going to be the wonderful thing that when you as a visitor go there, you're going to have this wonderful experience of maybe looking up your name and finding out these stories about that connect you further, that have come in from all these people from around the world.
It's wonderful, Camilla. We've had so many contributions already that we're finding so many exciting stories there and things to explore, and they will also help guide us on the themes that we'll use for the exhibits in the museum.
And one cannot overstate how Inverness is such a wonderful place to start your journey around the Highlands. I mean, as you say, the train is so easy. It's already a wonderful place to visit. And then take 5 miles to Culloden. Easy to take the castle route around all the castles around Aberdeenshire. I mean, it's really a lovely central spot. And now this is going to be opening up an even greater experience. So,
well, indeed, and of course Inverness is Scotland's newest city, of course, and it sits on the River Ness. It also is next to the Caledonian Canal and Loch Ness as well. So if you wanted to, you could sail in a boat to Inverness as well. But it's really well located for getting to places. Say you're coming to Scotland and you're coming to Edinburgh, for example. Your next port of call would absolutely be Inverness. You get a very easy link then to the Isle of Skye, to the Outer Hebrides, to the Northern Isles, which is of course the centre of the universe and where I am today. But it's very easy and it's very short travel distance. People are often surprised to learn that it only takes about 2.5 hours to drive to Inverness from Edinburgh. It takes 3.5 hours on the train. It's no time at all. And that is surely one of the most splendid train journeys in the world.
I love it. It's one of my favorites. And I think the big thing to stress to people outside of the UK that may not know it as well and know Scotland as well is when they see this much space, they think that must be 10 hours. Well, in fact, it's 2 hours. And this space between Glasgow and Edinburgh is less than an hour. So, but this is really wonderful. And thank you so much for sharing this. I think the spirit of Scotland, spirit of the Highlands, the oral history is such a wonderful way for us to be connected to this project. And if we could check back in with you a little bit more in your role as the chair of UHI Tourism, I think there's a lot more that we could be catching up with you on. So I hope that in the weeks to come, we can do that.
That would be lovely. I'm always happy to tell people about Scotland.
Great. Thank you.
Picture of me on your wall, painted red, painted dark, painted tall. Draw a tall, strong man with a strong, strong face. Draw a tall, strong man hanging over this space.